in my life, thanks to a revelation from the Lord, an experience that I feel the impulse to share with you. I have never spoken so sincerely and directly before, but I was convinced that I had to do so and reveal to everyone the details of this very personal encounter with him. The experience was so intense that I spent the whole night awake reflecting. Now with humility and devotion I am imploring the Holy Spirit to provide me with the courage and the words to transmit what I saw and what I learned during that very special time. It is crucial to share it because Jesus Christ assured me directly that his return is imminent. This revealing experience occurred on July 6, 2014, and since then I have observed and valued it deeply. I recorded it on paper and shared it among some contacts on Facebook, friends from church and family. Some received it well, others not so much. But my role is simply to be the faithful bearer of this critical message that he entrusted to me. My purpose here is not to debate theologically or persuade anyone about the veracity of my experience. I am simply going to relate the facts as they occurred from the beginning. It does not matter if you are a believer who expects the tribulation in the middle to the end or during the whole period. As I mentioned, my intention is not to argue or provoke intriguing comments about what I saw or what I felt. I am here to sincerely share what I witnessed and start from that point. So it all began when I sank into a deep sleep. I lay down like any other typical, nothing unusual. I fell asleep immediately, and while I was in a deep sleep I was not sure if I was in my body. I was standing next to the Lord Jesus Christ, and he remained at my right side throughout that incredible experience. Gently, but firmly, Jesus took my hand and together we began to walk. Jesus held my right hand firmly intertwined with his. We found ourselves in a mysterious and welcoming city that I did not know. I am not sure of the name of the small town where we were. I only remember a huge white building on one side, and I looked up at that large building and then towards the sky that seemed to be alive. It moved as if it was saturated with intense lightning, and it looked somewhat terrifying. But when I looked towards the distant horizon I saw a woman running towards me desperately, and she began to scream, and everybody screamed, terrified, completely out of their minds. It was something amazing, and they kept saying they have disappeared. Confused, I asked, who has disappeared exactly? Tell me who has disappeared. And she replied to me, you did not see anything. Somewhat amazed I replied, what are you talking about? At that moment the lady who could not see Jesus by my side exclaimed with energy, the aliens came and took all the Christians. And I said, aliens, seriously? She said, definitely. The Christians have disappeared suddenly. They went up in that dramatic moment. The lady simply ran away again, for she was totally frantic, and she ran screaming in terror as fast as her legs allowed her, in a state of absolute panic and terror, with her heart beating rapidly. Then I saw that I was on top of a hill. I observed the infinite horizon of this deserted city, at that exact moment, and I could see everything around consumed by the flames. Everything, absolutely everything, was on fire. Cars, houses, abandoned buildings. Before my eyes the chaos was unimaginable. At that devastating moment the smell of smoke was dense and suffocating. From afar I observed how people looted mercilessly, stealing from abandoned cars, taking things from buildings, noises of a collapsing city, and Jesus remained silent. I felt his thoughts when he touched my hand. I understood what he was thinking, but he never spoke. I just stood there staring in wonder at the busy city and thought, my God, what is really going on here? Without warning we suddenly changed places. We left that noisy environment and moved to a completely different one. I was watching carefully and attentively Europe. I was sure I was watching Europe because I was behind, but it felt I was immersed in an interactive movie. It was a really strange experience, and as I looked closely at Europe I noticed a distinguished man in the dynamic city of Berlin. All the world leaders gathered behind a huge table. It was a majestic round table, large, of monumental proportions, like an office. It was a dark sea with several chairs around it. Important and prominent leaders of the world were gathered behind this great and imposing table. There was a particular man, I did not know who he was. Now I know, and soon I will reveal. And all the people that begged him for help, requesting an urgent solution to the constant disturbances and the chaotic madness that was occurring all over the world. At that moment he calmly gave direction, showing them the way to follow. He possessed immense wisdom in his words. He was a very powerful man, this was visible. He wore a refined grey suit and he was a man from the Middle East. Then suddenly, without warning, that scene abruptly ended. At that precise moment the Lord spoke to me about this mysterious man, revealing his identity in Bible passage. The Lord showed me that all the people in this meeting without exception would give their kingdoms to him in a single hour. As I mentioned, I am not a Bible scholar, I have no theological training, I am just a man who loves Jesus and seeks him with all my heart. The next scene I see, it is shown on television on CNN and Fox. Everywhere in the world the man was on television and he was explaining to all the people of the world what happened to those who disappeared. He explained on television that they had been rebels led by their rebellion and punished. All these individuals were Christians and they were all being severely punished and taken away. Then he, without showing any emotion, simply explained that he was the new supreme leader of the world. I looked outside and watched in dismay. It was a gradual but inevitable process as he was taking power, and this I will not forget. It is something very personal. This is precisely what I felt at that moment. Every day in every corner of the world, people wake up with a sense of tranquility, a tranquility of which they are not aware. They go to bed with it and wake up with it again the next day. Even the greatest sinner carries within him a hidden peace that they do not perceive. But when the rapture happens and we are caught up, an absence of peace is experienced such as I have never felt in my life. This lack of peace was extended across the globe. I used to believe that the Spirit wholly residing in each Christian remains permanently when we sincerely invite him into our hearts, and that he continues with us during the rapture. However, I do not have a biblical basis to affirm this with certainty. I really do not know. The only thing I know is that in this apocalyptic world, in the vision, there was no prayer. There is no true peace, there was no genuine joy, only total and overwhelming chaos reigns, and this man with his mere presence gives the impression of offering a fictitious peace when he appears on television. He provides a feeling of comfort that envelops everyone, making them follow him immediately because they are terrified and deeply distressed. People rush to him for the fleeting peace he promises. Although it is a deceptive and superficial peace, I am not really sure how to accurately describe it. It is as if he were directly on television explaining everything that happened to the Christians. Then suddenly I see numerous people in Iran, Iraq and especially in Pakistan within that geographic region celebrating effusively, shouting in unison, "The Mahdi has arrived." They repeated it over and over again, "The Mahdi has arrived." At first I did not understand what that meant, but now I have investigated further. They called him the Mahdi, everyone called him that way, and it turns out that he was indeed from the Middle East, a devout Muslim. I know because he himself confirmed it. I will not go into that complicated part yet. This is what follows. I see him appear on television urging all children and elderly people included to take their Bibles to the stadiums and specific sites. He said if you find a Bible, it is required by law that you take it to these assigned places that are like courts and schools places, as well as places like police stations. Everyone started to bring their Bibles and started to stack them. Soon there were whole shelves and huge piles of Bibles. There were thousands, even millions of Bibles scattered everywhere. It was amazing to see how everyone did it voluntarily, just bringing to the authority their Bibles without any coercion. I saw them everywhere. I clearly remember there were piles and piles of Bibles stacked, practically flooded the place completely. When people handed their Bible, the authority wrote their name on a piece of paper detailing who had brought the Bible, what kind it was, or any other relevant description. They even told everyone without exception that if you were interested in checking something in the Bible, and you can come and do so freely. But it turned out to be a hoax, because when people came to check something on their Bible, their name was recorded again, creating a feeling of being permanently watched. It was a state of perpetual surveillance, strange and disturbing. This site was transformed into a vast library. In a few months I observed a large soccer field full of Bibles that extended probably up to 3 or 4 stories high. All the Bibles were burned and incinerated under the orders of the leader, as I mentioned. They pour gasoline and set these Bibles on fire. There was an enormous amount of smoke when these Bibles were consumed, and then I observed these new flags that he placed in each court. Flag of any country, whether it was the United States of America or European, were removed and replaced by his new green and white that was adorned with spectacular golden swords in the center. Similar to a saber, that is what I am trying to say, a spectacular swords. In the center there were many color, and each color symbolized an extremist group, all having contributed significantly upon his rise to power as they gave him important support. We continued with Jesus to another area, and there I observed multitudes of people every Friday without exception were forced to worship this leader. Everyone had to wear rigorously white. All were lined up in order in perfect rows, and each row was impeccably precise. In these rows they positioned one next to the other without invading anyone's personal space according to the rules. Each individual had to kneel and worship when told to, and I observed these giant screens, simply enormous, mounted on the sides of the majestic buildings of the courts throughout the city. And on Fridays he was appearing enigmatically. No matter where you were, whether in America, in Europe, or anywhere else in the world, you had to go to this popular place of worship on Fridays and stare at the screen to worship him. There was site of worship all over the world, in Rome and in my hometown where I reside. Well, after the broadcast ends and I observed Christians who remained, I must tell you honestly what I saw with my own. Many of these Christians heard the message of grace that was proclaimed. Instead of being transformed in their inner man, they continued leading a compromising lifestyle. In fact, they lived exactly like the world, and they were left behind. Literally thousands of Christians who were left on earth at that time, that they were born again, that they lived righteously, that they did everything correctly, but it was not so. They lived like the world, and they only maintained a superficial appearance of devotion, and their hearts were so distant from the Lord, but they still believed that they were intimately united to Him. They were those of whom even the Bible constantly speaks. In my name you cast out demons, in my name you heal the sick, also in my name you perform miracle. Depart from me, I never knew you. That is exactly what happened. They were everywhere. There were literally fervent Christian people present everywhere, and I saw some pastors preaching that particular watered-down message of grace. These pastors were left here as punishment because they were preaching a lukewarm gospel, so they were left here, and these people who were left were tremendously angry. It was terrible, truly heartbreaking, and they were clearly in disagreement with their preachers who had preached them a lukewarm gospel, and they said, "You deceived us, you did not tell us the truth." While I was with Jesus, he continually pointed out to me, "Observe this and pay attention to this." He asked me, "Do you remember this leader?" He did not express it verbally, but I caught his thoughts. He urged me, "Pay attention." When I looked at what he was pointing out to me, I understood that I had gone back in time before the Antichrist took control of everything. We are at the beginning, right after the rapture happened. People were furious, very upset to be left behind. I saw pastors and those leaders, and though I recognized some of them, I will never mention their names because the Lord asked me not to. I observed leaders who appeared on television, mainly preaching the gospel on TBN and other similar Christian channels. Unfortunately, they remained. People were very angry, even ready to kill these pastors. It was a truly atrocious experience. I saw a very special lady whom I know well. I worked with her in a church for 13 long years. I was humbly the janitor there, and she was one of the respected members. She was looking up with an intense look. She made an obscene gesture to the Lord, looking up at the sky. Then she uttered some extremely rude words. I observed people turning against God. They were angry also against innocent people.